This is the part 3 of the workshop on recovering Yeshua's initiatic teachings from the Aramaic core of the Gospel of Thomas. We're going to look at some of the more abstruse teachings about Kabbalistic spiritual realities and the Abba. Logian 83 is very much incomprehensible to many people, even scholars who translate it. So I put it back into its Aramaic terms. The Zelamim are perceivable by mankind, but the divine light in them remains hidden in the Zelam of the light of the Abba. He will be revealed, but his Zelam will remain concealed by his light. Usually people translate the word with images, because that's what the Greek word is, but the Hebrew word was the word used in the book of Genesis, Zelam. The saying means that the image of God, and we'll discuss what that means, what a Zelam is hidden in all the things visible to mankind, but is itself invisible because it is one with the nature of the Ein Sof Or, of the divine light. In other words, the nature of Godhead as an image is light, primordial light. I have to explain a little bit about the emission theory of sight. In Yeshua's day, it was thought that the way sight occurred was light went out from the eye and struck an object and came back to the eye. And that is why Yeshua talks about the light that comes from a man of light and all that sort of thing, the light that goes out into the darkness from your eyes and so on. You'll find very often Adam Kadmon. That means the original Adam. The primal archetypal Adam is represented as light coming out of his eyes. And this was called the emission theory of sight, that sight was caused by light that came out from inside your eyes. Now, in the medieval period, an Arabic philosopher figured out that light came into your eyes from the outside, and we no longer accept that explanation. But that was still a spiritual explanation, the idea of spiritual light coming out of the eyes. And that is the understanding that Yeshua had. So the image of God is not a thing that can be seen by light emitted from the human eye, but it's constituted of the Ein Sof Or. That would be the way it would be understood. That would be understood why people cannot see the image of God. The time will come when God will be revealed to mankind in the coming Malkuth, in the Olam Haba, but even then God's image will remain hidden in divine light. Now, this part, he will be revealed, but his Zelam will remain concealed by his light. The divine light was the glory or Shekinah of God, the feminine aspect of Godhead whose manifestations are visible to mankind. In Sefer Yetzirah, the Shekinah was divided into 32 paths of wisdom, or Chachmah. When the vessels are shattered, then they intercommunicate through 32 paths, through 22 paths of wisdom, and that plus the 10 original Sephirot constitute 32 paths of wisdom, 32 aspects of wisdom. And Chachmah was understood then as a mother, as a strict mother, who both disciplined the Hakim, who would wish to become a wise person, a person on the road to wisdom, which was also the same as the road to sainthood, and also would reveal the mysteries of heaven to him. So that which we see in nature is what human beings are able to see with their eyes, and what that represents is an unseen reality that we have pictured above the scene of the sunrise or the sunset over here, and that is the Shekinah of Godhead, surrounded by all kinds of angelic beings. So Isaiah and Enoch and Yeshua all ascended to the Merkaba in the spark of their own divine zelamim. They saw with a divine faculty, quote, to serve as God's eye, as we had in Logian 22. So they're not seeing with human eyes, they're seeing with another kind of eye that is the spiritual eye. So even in the coming Malkuth on earth, human eyes will not be able to see an image of Godhead, only manifestations of divine attributes. But as opposed to the human past, where the things that human beings took for granted and saw with their eyes, the glorious things they saw, they will in the sovereignty of God, in the Olam Haba, in the Messianic age, they will be recognized for what they are, as the outer manifestations of the glory and the Shekinah of Godhead. Now the next Logian is related to it. It's another Kabbalistic teaching. When you perceive your Damutot, you rejoice, but when you will perceive your Zelamim, which came into being before you, and which neither die nor become manifest, how much will you be able to bear? Here we end with the rabbinic and Kabbalistic challenge that ends with a question. Now, we have to understand that this is a Kabbalistic interpretation of the formation or creation of mankind in Genesis 1:26 and following. The point of the comment is to emphasize the transcendent wonder of the disciples' divine nature, which pre-existed their incarnate personal selves, their Yehida and their Neshama. The image, or Zelam, and likeness, Damut, are the two words that are used in the creation of mankind, or the formation of mankind. The creation is called a Yetzer, which is a formation. And that's why we have the world of Yetzirah and so on, the world of formation. And there are two things that we consider. There is the image and there is the likeness. Now the image is what we talked about previously. The image is neither dies nor becomes manifest, and that is what is the highest, most secret spiritual reality within a person, the divine spark. And the likeness is not quite like a mirror image, or like a sort of a picture you'd see of yourself in the water or something like that, but it means something different than the image. So when you perceive your own reflection, your own image that you're able to see, you rejoice. But when will you perceive your Zelamim, which came into being before you, and which neither die nor become manifest? The Hebrew word that was used to describe the divine image or fire or spark within mankind was Zelam. It referred not to a physical image, but to the essential nature of something, whether it's good or evil. And that essential nature is seen with a different faculty than the human eye. It's not something that can be represented graphically. The word damut, likeness, referred to similarity. Again, not a physical similarity, but an essential likeness. The word for a physical form or image seen with the eyes was to'ar, which was not used here. So what we're talking about are different aspects of the human formation. Now let's take a look at this from another angle. When you perceive your damutot, you rejoice, but when you will perceive your zelamim, he is saying that you will perceive your zelamim. He says that even though it's imperceptible, it is immortal. It is immortal, and it came into existence. It was in existence before you came into existence. The image and likeness of Godhead constitutes the imago Dei, or the divine image. This is invisible. So one would refer to a Jewish saint or a tzaddik or a hakim, someone who manifested the qualities of Godhead, as a son of God or a son of Godhead, meaning also a daughter of God or a daughter of Godhead. And those people would be manifesting these qualities. That was not because of a visible image, but because he or she shared in the divine nature. And that nature was described in the many names of God, such as crowned head, Keter, wisdom, Chachma, understanding, Bina, constituting the names of the supernal triad of the Kabbalistic tree, with others like justice, compassion, and beauty, and so on. These all describe the Zelem of Godhead, and as names, each was a damut, or likeness of Godhead. So one way to visualize it is to visualize a Kabbalistic tree with the 10 Sephirot, and you can visualize the tree itself with all the Sephirot as the Zelem, or the formation of the, rather not the formation, but the Zelem, or word that we might use as image of Godhead. And each of these names of qualities of Godhead was a damut, or likeness of Godhead, one of the many kinds of refracted reflections of Godhead. So the means by which the divine image communicated with a person was through motions or impulses in the heart. Taken collectively, they constituted the Yetzer HaTov, or good inclination, or good impulse, or good motivation. And that's how Godhead communicates with an individual being. Then the question, how much will you be able to bear, is tosses it over to the student again. He says, when the time comes that you will actually be able to see that which pre-existed yourself and is your true high divine nature, will you be able to stand in that light? Will you be able to bear it? It was said that Moses could not stand in the presence of God because it would kill him. It would just absolutely destroy him. And so therefore, I love the translation in the King James, he saw only the hinder parts of God. But basically, the idea was that one could not stand in the full presence of Godhead and continue to live or continue to survive. That changed later in history as we started to have the riders of the chariot, the Merkaba mystics, who would ascend to the throne of God and speak with God face to face, so to speak. And God is always represented in those cases, and this is pretty ancient stuff, but as a very aged old man, a patriarch, the kind of thing you would see painted on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And that's where we got the God as an old man type of thing. But that was, and remember, just an allegory. He was really called the Ancient of Days, the one who is primordially existent before time even began. And it was represented in that way. Now let's take a look at Logion 18. The disciples besought Yeshua, tell us about our ultimate future. And Yeshua replied, then have you discovered Haroshit, the beginning of divine emanation, that you are now qualified to inquire about Ha'akarit, the end of all the worlds? For where the Makom, meaning the divine eon or place or loka, of Haroshit exists, that will be Ha'akarit. Where the beginning is, the primordial beginning, that will be the ultimate ending. Blessed is he who is able to stand at Haroshit, for he shall know the Ha'akaret, and he shall never taste death. Now this is a private Kabbalistic discussion between Yeshua and his close disciples. This is a saying of Yeshua that was transmitted and learned and memorized, and it's a Kabbalistic saying about the beginnings and the endings. Yeshua did not expect the end of the world to come to an apocalyptic ending, as other apocalyptic prophets did. He had a very different understanding. This particular saying reflects that understanding. It's a very deep understanding of eschatology. And eschatology is not the world is not going to end tomorrow, the next day, or 2 months from now, or something like that. It's a very long and ancient track that it goes upon. Haroshit, Rosh Hashanah. Rosh means the head of something, and Haroshit is the beginning, but it's the beginning in the sense of the head, or the fountainhead of something, of all things. It's not really so much the beginning in a stream of time, because when you time something, you're starting at a particular time. But this is the fountainhead before time. And so the Greek term arche, which is also used, which means that the ancient time, the ancient beginning, is a little different. Haroshit is the term that's used at the very beginning of Genesis. Beroshit. Ha-akaret is the final and ultimate end of all things, all reality, all universes. So the disciples are asking about their own futures in the Malkuth, in the sovereignty of God. As, for example, when James and John, the sons of Zebedee, ask what their reward will be. And that's described in the Synoptic Gospels. And they go privately to Yeshua and they say, will we sit next to you at the Messianic banquet in the assembly of the saints? What will our position be? What will our rank be? And Yeshua says, I can't tell you that. That's not known. And then the other disciples are jealous, or they're angry at these two for having made this kind of request. So in one gospel, it appears that they themselves make the request, but in the later redaction of another gospel, their request is made by their mother to take the heat off of them. Well, anyway, here all the disciples are asking about what is our future? What will we have? What will we be? And questions like, have you discovered Haroshit, are idiomatic ways of throwing the burden of thought over to the student in Kabbalistic discussion, as when Yeshua declares in Luke 12:49, and I'm paraphrasing it, the Baranash is coming to kindle divine fire upon the earth, but what will he do if it is already kindled? Again, these don't expect a specific kind of answer. When he says the Son of Man is coming to kindle divine fire upon the earth, but what will he do if it is already kindled? What would you expect as an answer for that? Well, Yeshua is obviously, from that question, Yeshua is implying that he is kindling that flame for the Baranash. That implies that he is not identifying himself with the Baranash. And there are many of these other statements in the New Testament where it's very clear that Yeshua distinguishes between himself and the Son of Man, or the Baranash. He speaks about the Son of Man in the third person singular and as a separate being. For where the makom, which is a divine eon or olam, or as I said, like something like a loka, of Haroshit exists, that will be ha'akaret. Where the beginning exists, that will be the end. Blessed is he who is able to stand at the beginning, for he shall know the ending, and he shall never taste death. The beginning of all emanation, or creation, which is, as I said, Haroshit Bereshit is the opening phrase of Genesis, is the Ein Sof Or, or the cloud of light, the Anan that will always hide the face of Godhead within and beyond human understanding. That's the beginning. This is the same makom, or plane of reality, as the end of all things. So the Baranash is the blessed one who is able to stand at the beginning, i.e. at the throne of the Abba in the 10th heaven, and to that one will be revealed all the Ratzim of heaven, including the future of the world and mankind. So, blessed is he, namely the body of the saints that is gathered together as the new humanity, who is able to stand at Haroshit, which is the throne of God in the 10th heaven, and not be destroyed, but to be actually stand there and to have communion with the highest Godhead, and so on, and the fountain of reality. For he shall know both the beginning and the ending, and he shall never taste death. He will always be uh, remain in continuity of consciousness, and he will be an eternal being like all the beings of heaven. And he shall know the end and shall never taste death. He is a standing one of the Kima. The word Kima means a standing, one who's standing up again. And the word anastasis, resurrection, means also to stand up again. And that's why in the Gnostics they very often use the term standing one. He's a standing one. The Baranash is a standing one of the Kima, found worthy to ascend beyond the paradise of the third heaven and abide at the throne. And when we look at the teachings about death, where you go after you die, and all that sort of thing, we'll understand a little bit better of what is being said here. Login 19. Blessed is the one who existed before he was emanated into existence. If you become my true disciples and put my words into practice, these very stones will minister to you. And then it goes on to tell the Kabbalistic parable of the 5 trees in paradise, which we're going to look at in a moment. Well, we find a doctrine, something like the idea of existence before existence, in John's Gospel, where Yeshua says, "Before Abraham was, I am," and he uses the one interpretation of the Tetragrammaton, "I am that I am." There's a Kabbalistic and Pauline doctrine of pre-existent reality of the Christ, or of the Son of Mankind, or the Baranash. Paul talks about the pre-existent reality of the Christ and the preordination of the souls who are going to become members of that body in his letters. Colossians 1:15-19. The Baranash, that is the Christ, who is the Zelom of the invisible God and the firstborn of all creation. Now, this is what Paul is saying, and Paul is saying this as a rabbi who understands Kabbalistic philosophy, although he hasn't understood the teachings of Jesus extremely well, but he understands the Kabbalistic philosophy relating to the creation of mankind and so on. So he is saying that Christ is the Zelom of the invisible God. It's translated in the New Testament as Christ is the image of the invisible God. But the Zelom is that the actual tree that contains all those vessels containing all the virtues of Godhead. He's the firstborn of all creation. And now that implies emanation, because Godhead emanates by giving birth to things, not by forming them and shaping them like a potter shapes a pot, even though Paul uses that image in other places. But he refers to Christ as the firstborn of all creation. Because in him were all things created, those in the heavens and those upon the earth, those visible and those invisible, and he existed before all things. He is the head of the body, which is the assembly of saints, the arche, or haroshit, firstborn. By the way, that firstborn is probably where we get the term monogenes, that is translated into Greek and understood as only begotten Son of God. But it means really the firstborn, the primordial Son of God. In him it did please all the pleroma to dwell. Whoa, we're starting to sound kind of Gnostic here. Well, the Gnostic pleroma was derived from Jewish Kabbalistic emanation. Here we have pre-Gnostic ideas that are part of Jewish Kabbalah that are being expressed very well by Paul. The pleroma is the rest of the emanation. The emanation begins at one point, and then it goes from there to the next point and the next point and so on. It grows and swells like a growing tree. Thomas Login 19, this one up here, may be the source of the following login of the Gospel of Philip, which says, "Blessed is he who is before he came into being, for he who is, has been, and shall be." The idea you have to understand of existence is the Kabbalistic idea of existence means to be manifest, to be visible, to be obvious in some way, to be perceivable. The great Christian teacher in the Alexandrian Catechetical School, whose name was Basilides, whose works we simply know from other writers, gave an explanation of the beginning of all things that is undoubtedly adapted from Kabbalistic ideas. There was a time, he says, when there was nothing. Not even nothing was there, but simply, clearly, without any sophistry, there was nothing at all. When I say there was, I do not indicate a being, but in order to signify what I want to express, I say that there was nothing at all. For that is not simply something ineffable, which is named, and we call it ineffable, but it is not even ineffable. It's not even unnameable, for what is not even expressible is called not even inexpressible, but is above every name that is named. For names do not even suffice for the world, so multiform as it is, but fall short, and I do not have it in me to find correct names for everything. Rather, it is proper to comprehend unnamableness without using names, the characteristics of the things which are to be named. For the existence of the same designations for different things has caused the hearer's confusion and error about the thing. So since, therefore, there was nothing, no matter, no substance, nothing insubstantial, nothing simple, nothing composite, nothing non-composite, nothing imperceptible, no man, no angel, no God, nothing at all that can be named or can be apprehended by sense apprehension, nothing of the mental things, and thus also nothing of that which can be simply described in even more subtle ways. The non-existent God, without intelligence, without perception, without will, without resolve, without impulse, without desire, wished to make a world. I say he wished for want of a word, wish, intelligence, and perception being excluded. By world, I mean not the flat divisible world of which later divided itself, but a world seed. And he's talking about the universe here. The world seed had everything in it, as the mustard seed contains everything together in a tiny space. The roots, the stem, the branches, and the innumerable leaves, the grains of seed which come to the plant, which in turn again and again spread seed for yet more plants. Thus the non-existent God made a non-existent world from the non-existent, inasmuch as he deposited and planted one single seed which contained in itself the whole seed mixture of the world. Or, to make plainer, what they say, just as the egg of a variegated and many-colored bird, such as a peacock or some other even more variegated and many-colored species, although it is only single, yet it has within it many shapes of multiform, multicolored, and heterogeneous things, so the non-existent seed deposited by the non-existent God has within it the multiform and heterogeneous seed mixture of the world. In other words, he's talking about not just creation ex nihilo, God creates things out of nothing, but God emanates his own being out of nothing. And so the first thing he creates is non-existence. And out of non-existence he brings infinity, and out of infinity he brings the Ein Sof Or, the ultimate light, and so on. So this is the idea of that which is before he exists. In order to exist, it has to be manifest, it has to be emanated. So that which existed before it was emanated, because it was part of Godhead already. This concept, these very stones will minister to you. Well, this is a Semitic idiom for God's power to create men out of stones, and it's something we find attributed also to John the Baptist and sometimes to Jesus in the New Testament Gospels. It's to say these stones will minister to you. It's the legend that God can create servants and soldiers and other things out of stones or bones. Now comes a very interesting legend. For there are 5 trees in the Pardes, that's paradise, which are unmoved in summer or winter, and their leaves never fall. And whoever has knowledge of them will not taste death. That's gnosis, the Aramaic manda. Well, you know of the 2 trees in the Garden of Eden, which is paradise, the Pardes. But this is a legend about 5 trees. Now, where does that come up? Well, the place that we're going to find it is with a contemporary of Yeshua named Philo of Alexandria, a Jewish writer. The 5 trees is a story or a legend that Philo of Alexandria transmits as Kabbalistic Haggadah about Noah's 5 trees of the Pardes. According to the story, Noah planted 5 trees, a tree of life, immortality, knowledge, comprehension, and knowledge of good and evil, in paradise, because the other trees had been destroyed by the fall of man. The Pardes, or paradise, is the mystic primordial garden where enlightened Kabbalists meet in spirit to learn and share divine manda or knowledge. The gate to the Pardes is allegorical for the halakhic wisdom of an enlightened master of Israel. So if you talk about the gate of Yeshua, you're talking about his path of entrance into the Pardes. So that's a term that you will find used in rabbinic terminology. In a commentary on Genesis 2:9, Philo writes that the leaves of the trees in paradise are evergreen and would never lose their leaves, i.e., which are unmoved in summer or winter, and their leaves never fall. So we know that Yeshua is alluding to this same Kabbalistic allegory. Logia 19 refers to a five-tree form of Kabbalistic parties that was current at the time of Yeshua. That plus the Aramaisms and the supporting texts like the Johannine and Q sources, which provide uh, texts that the Johannine and Q sources provide strongly indicate its authenticity. Now, Philo of Alexandria was a Hellenistic Jewish philosopher contemporary with Yeshua, and I'm going to give you an account, my understanding of Philo's Kabbalistic Haggadah about the five trees. He says when Noah died, he ascended into paradise, which is the Pardes of the third heaven, and was empowered to plant five Kabbalistic trees that would eventually redeem post-diluvian humanity. You see, the tree of the life, the tree of life of the Elohim, had been destroyed by the Elohim after the transgression of Adam and Eve, who ate the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so that was no longer in the garden. So he was given permission to replant trees, five trees, that would be stepping stones for the liberation of humanity from the evil that they had unleashed in eating the tree of good and evil, because the knowledge of good and evil was something that activated the Yetzer Hara, or evil inclination, the shadow of the good inclination, and made it into something very real and definite for mankind. And the conflict between good and evil in the heart of humans, and the good and evil inclinations, was going to be a terrible struggle from then on. Now, first and greatest of the trees he planted was the tree of the life of the Elohim, which had been destroyed after the transgression of Adam and Eve, and whose fruits were reserved for only the greatest of the saints. Second was the tree of human immortality, whose fruits were reserved for those who were found worthy of the Kima, of the resurrection. Third was the tree of Manda, or Gnosis, or divine wisdom, whose fruits were reserved for those who sought Hakma, or wisdom. This is not to be confused with the knowledge of good and evil, which is the tree that Adam and Eve illicitly ate from. Fourth was the tree of comprehension, or understanding, Bina, whose fruits were reserved for those who had purified and attuned their hearts to God's way. The fifth, and the most accessible of the trees, was that of the knowledge, meaning successful discrimination of good and evil. The two Yetzerim of the heart, one being the true image of God, the other the false and unreal shadow image of the Klippot that manifested by necessity in the world of duality. Thus, by eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the evil Yetzer was empowered in the hearts of humanity, of the old humanity, and became a real contender against the good Yetzer. Now, when one achieved interior purity of motivation and made the two one, he would begin to eat the fruit of the fifth tree. In other words, when he became the same person on the outside as he was on the inside, when he had made himself single. When his heart was attuned to heaven's guidance, he would eat of the fruit of the fourth tree. Remember, the voice of God is not in the windstorm, and not in the firestorm, and not in the hurricane, not in the earthquake, and so on, but in a still, small voice. If he became an Hakim, a wise person, he ate the fruit of the third tree of Manda, knowledge. If he achieved the Kima, he ate the fruit of the second tree of human immortality, and thus the disciple would advance until he or she was worthy to eat the fruit of the tree of life of the Elohim. Now let's take a look at Yeshua's teachings, his inner circle teachings on death and afterlife. I'm using an Egyptian motif here, which shows the Kabbalistic uh, uh, Ka, possibly it's a Ba. It's the two aspects of the soul. One is the part of the soul that eventually will disintegrate and remains around the body, and the Ba is the one that is able to communicate between heaven and earth. The Ba is somewhat equivalent to Ruach, and the Ka is somewhat equivalent to the Nefesh that we're going to be discussing. But the reason I'm using this image is because the Kabbalistic ideas of mystic Judaism are rooted in Egyptian mortuary science and Egyptian ideas about afterlife and death. And those ideas are much, much older than even that. They are shamanic ideas. And so those ideas are very, very ancient. And they are very powerful ideas. And they're very similar to, in general terms, to the insights about death and afterlife that you find in Buddhism and Hinduism, the more shamanic aspects that you find then in Tibetan Buddhism and in various shamanic religions and so on. So these are the teachings that we find in the Aramaic core of the Gospel of Thomas on death and afterlife. Logian 37. His disciples asked, "When will the Bar Anash be revealed to us, and when shall we see him?" And Jesus answered, "When you disrobe without being ashamed, and take up your garments and place them under your feet like little children, and tread on them, then will you see the Son of the Living One," the Bar Anash, the Son of the Abba, the Living One, "and you will not be afraid." What is this saying? It says they will be able to see the Messiah and the Malkuth of the Abba manifest on earth. One, when they are able to die without fear. That's to disrobe without being ashamed. That's an allegorical for that. To take off your body, to leave your body behind. They will see the Bar Anash and not be afraid. They will see the Son of Man, because they will not be afraid, because their judgment will not throw them into Gehenna for a certain term of purification of the soul. Remember that fear, or the divine awe, or fear of God, was the beginning of wisdom. And they have now gotten beyond that place, because they will not be afraid. They will not experience that kind of fear. And when they learn non-attachment to the illusions of the physical body and the world, and to see with the eye of the soul rather than the eyes of the flesh, then they will see the Bar Anash and the Living One. Now compare that to Logian 113. "Be the Malkuth of the Father is spread out upon the earth, but men do not see it." It's here. We just don't have the faculties to see it. The faculties would be what the Greeks would refer to as noetic. It's the nous, or the higher mind, that allows us to see with the eye of the nous, which is the single eye that allows us to see spiritual things that are prior to and clothed in physical manifestation. And we can compare Logian 80. "Whoever has known the world has found only the body, but whoever has known the world as only an external body, of him the world is not worthy." Miriam asked Yeshua, "What are your disciples like?" He said, "They are like small children who are dressing up and playing house with property they don't own. When the owners of the property come upon them, they will say, 'Give us back what we own.' They strip naked and give everything back to them." Now, incidentally, this is one of the few of the logia that are given any kind of a setting. And here it's said that Mary, probably Mary Magdalene, who was part of the inner circle, asked this question. This was a typical Kabbalistic question. It's a kind of a question that was asked of Kabbalistic teachers and rabbinic teachers to say, what is something like? And then they would give them an allegory, or they would give them a parable, or something like that that would explain what's like the kingdom of heaven, or the sovereignty of heaven. The Malkuth of heaven is like this, or the Malkuth of heaven is like that. And these likenesses that are given are allegories that are highly fanciful and not to be taken literally. So he asks, what are your disciples like? Now, this one has been translated rather poorly by Coptologists in the past because they've made some assumptions that aren't correct. And I'll explain that. This is a typical question, as I said, for a Kabbalistic disciple. The login has been misunderstood and mistranslated by scholars as little children who have, quote, installed themselves in a field which is not theirs. Well, it doesn't make any sense. Why would they, when they're caught, what does it mean to be installed in a field? And then when they're caught, why do they run off and strip their clothes away? It makes no sense whatsoever, but that's the way it's been translated because most Coptologists are going very literally from simple meanings that they take out of the Coptic itself. But if they go back into the Aramaic and see what the antecedents were, then you will understand what this is saying. The Coptic word selat has the general meaning to dwell or visit, and the Coptic word socha of property. So this has been translated as children playing in a field or dwelling in a field owned by others who strip naked when the owners of the field demand their field back. And this makes absolutely no sense, but that's the way you'll find it translated just about everywhere. Literally, the children are playing dress-up in adult clothing, probably in the home of one of their parents. Yeshua answers Mary that she and all the disciples are like children who are imitating grown-ups by playing house and dressing in adult clothing. When the owners discover what they're doing, they make them strip off the clothing, which doesn't belong to them, and run back to their own homes. So when the owners of the property come back upon them, they will say, give us back what we own, and they will strip naked and give everything back to them. Now that's the allegory of children playing dress-up, and then they get caught by one of the people, one of the parents who owns the stuff, and they say, take that all off and get out of here. Now, allegorically, when the time comes for each of the disciples to die, each will return their physical body, which is like the clothing, to the owners. Well, the owners are, in Kabbalistic, Hermetic, and other thought, the rulers of the earth and the flesh. These are the daimonia, the demons, who are the masters and the controllers of air, earth, fire, and air, earth, and water, of the elements that bodies are made of and things are made of. And they will strip off their bodies and leave their bodies and the world of flesh behind, and they will be able to do so easily, joyfully, and in full consciousness. So this is kind of a Christian Fowa, like Tibetan Fowa, I suppose. But what it is he's saying, my disciples are like little children who are playing dress up. That's why they're incarnate. They're in certain physical bodies and personalities. When the time comes that those things have to be given back to the elements, they will joyfully strip them off and run naked away. The owners are interesting. They're the demons of Hermetic thought, the Elilim, or the elemental powers of air, earth, fire, and water, comparable to the Greek idea of the little gods or demons. That's what a demon meant back then. It doesn't mean what we think of it as today. So the physical body dissolves at death. It's corrupted by the things that take it back, the lords of these elements. This is a very important part of Yeshua's teaching about non-attachment. We'll see many other examples of this. It was also a teaching of the wisdom schools. So the disciples are no longer afraid of death when it comes. You might recall that Paul says in one of his epistles, O death, where is thy sting? There's no more a sting to death. There's no longer a fear of death. That's why so many, even of the early Christians, were very willing to be martyred very quickly and easily, because they were not afraid of death. They were not afraid of what would happen to them after death.